the suburbs of Cedar Falls, the streets looked like the very definition of peace. Rows of manicured lawns, neatly painted houses, and the occasional sound of children riding their bikes gave the illusion of safety and stability. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved across the street and families felt protected. Much of that feeling came from Officer Richard Cole, a veteran cop whose uniform symbolized authority and reassurance. To most, he was the guardian of their quiet town, a man who patrolled with confidence and made residents believe nothing bad could ever slip past him. But appearances often conceal the truth. Richard Cole lived a life defined by two sides. One was the public face, disciplined, polite, and loyal to the badge. The other was a private world filled with resentment and anger, emotions he buried beneath years of training and performance. For all his outward charm, Cole harbored a deep prejudice against those who didn't fit his vision of the ideal community. His disdain was silent but persistent, hidden beneath friendly smiles and neighborly small talk. Nobody questioned him because nobody wanted to look past the uniform. 2 houses down from the Cole residence, a new presence began to attract quiet attention. Maya Turner, a 26-year-old nurse, had recently moved in after saving enough to buy her first home. She was ambitious, intelligent, and eager to start a new chapter in her life. Her youthful energy and optimism stood in contrast to Cole's hardened cynicism. While most of the neighbors welcomed her politely, Cole studied her with a cold curiosity. On the surface, he offered a professional courtesy when they crossed paths, giving her the same nod he would any resident. Yet his thoughts carried a complexity that nobody around him could detect. At first, it was small things, his patrol car slowing slightly as it passed her driveway, or his gaze lingering when she walked her dog in the evenings. To Maya, it was nothing unusual. She assumed he was being protective, perhaps checking on the safety of his new neighbor. After all, wasn't that what officers were supposed to do? But for Cole, it was something else entirely. It wasn't duty that kept drawing his eyes toward her house. It was a growing pull he couldn't explain or resist. Behind the mask of professionalism, he began to shape a dangerous obsession. His life, which had long felt empty and dull, suddenly had a focal point. Every time he saw her step outside, every moment her laughter carried across the yard, it stirred emotions in him that he had never allowed himself to confront. The contradiction was glaring. A man who often spoke with contempt about people like her now found himself silently craving her presence. The neighborhood remained blissfully unaware. Parents waved at Cole as he drove by, thanking him for keeping watch. Children smiled when he handed out stickers at community events. Meanwhile, just a few doors away, a quiet storm was forming. The seeds of a secret that would unravel lives had already been planted. No one yet knew that the same officer they trusted with their safety was standing on the edge of a dangerous path, one that would soon turn the peaceful suburb into the setting of a nightmare. Richard Cole's thoughts began to spiral in directions he never expected. The more time he spent near Maya Turner's home, the harder it became to separate his professional duties from his private desires. His long patrol shifts often ended with him driving past her street, headlights dimmed, pretending he was monitoring the neighborhood. In reality, he was studying the rhythm of her life, the times she left for work, when she returned, and how often her lights stayed on late into the night. What started as fleeting curiosity had become an obsession, and he justified it to himself as vigilance, as if he were simply ensuring her safety. Maya, new to the neighborhood and eager to settle in, had no reason to suspect the truth. She viewed Cole as a stable, older figure, someone she could rely on if trouble ever came knocking at her door. He carried himself with authority, and his uniform suggested protection. When their paths crossed at the mailbox or on the sidewalk, she offered polite smiles, never sensing the weight of the stares that followed her. Cole took these small exchanges as encouragement, twisting them into signs that she, too, felt a connection. The contradiction within him grew louder with each passing week. Cole's reputation among his colleagues was that of a hardliner, a man unafraid to voice resentment toward those he considered outsiders. He often made sharp remarks about black residents under his breath, earning quiet nods from like-minded officers. Yet now he found himself yearning for the company of a young black woman who represented everything he claimed to despise. It was a secret that both thrilled and terrified him. The risk of being exposed didn't weaken his attraction. It only strengthened it. Cole began engineering ways to insert himself into Maya's world. A casual knock on her door to warn her about minor break-ins in the area. A convenient stop by her driveway under the excuse of checking for suspicious activity. At first, she appreciated the concern. To her, it seemed like the neighborhood cop was simply doing his job, going a little further to make her feel welcome. But the lines blurred quickly. His visits became more frequent, his questions more personal, and his tone more possessive. It wasn't long before their relationship turned physical. It happened quietly, away from the eyes of the neighbors. For Maya, it was risky and complicated, but she told herself it was only temporary. For Cole, however, it was far more than that. Their secret encounters fed his hunger for control. What began as attraction soon morphed into domination, and his darker nature crept into every interaction. He wasn't interested in love or partnership, he wanted ownership. The affair was fueled by secrecy and contradiction, but also by the thrill of danger. Cole convinced himself he was entitled to her, that his authority gave him the right to dictate their terms. Maya, still unaware of just how deep his obsessions ran, thought she was simply caught in a romance that needed to remain private. Neither of them realized that the foundation being built was not one of love but of instability, and that the affair had already become the ticking fuse of something that could not end quietly. As the weeks passed, the carefully constructed walls around Richard Cole's double life began to crack. What had started as secret encounters and stolen moments was no longer easy to hide. Neighbors noticed the patrol car parked suspiciously close to Maya Turner's driveway, more often than it should have been. The same families who once praised Cole for his dedication now whispered about his frequent presence near her home. While no one had concrete proof of what was happening, suspicions grew, and gossip began to spread through the quiet streets of Cedar Falls. Inside the walls of Maya's home, the tone of their relationship had shifted. The charm that once drew her in had given way to something far darker. Cole became possessive in ways that made her uneasy. He wanted to know who she spoke to, where she went, and how she spent every minute of her day. At first, Maya brushed it off as overprotectiveness, perhaps even as a sign that he cared more than most men would. But soon it became suffocating. Every question felt like an interrogation. Every visit from him seemed less like affection and more like surveillance. Maya began to feel trapped. She was a young woman who had worked hard to carve out independence, only to find herself under the constant shadow of a man who claimed authority over her. The secrecy that once felt thrilling now felt like chains. When she tried to assert her freedom, Cole's temper revealed itself in sharp bursts of anger. His voice, once controlled and calm, grew cold and threatening. His presence, once comforting in her new neighborhood, turned into the very thing she feared most. Meanwhile, Cole's colleagues began noticing changes in his behavior. On the job, he was distracted and impatient. He snapped at fellow officers during patrols and grew irritable during routine assignments. His obsession with Maya consumed him so deeply that it leaked into every aspect of his life. Yet no one confronted him directly. His reputation as a strong, commanding figure made others wary of questioning him. To them, he was still the seasoned officer who had served the community for years, though some began to wonder if something was unraveling beneath the surface. The tension between Cole and Maya grew heavier with every encounter. She began pulling away, trying to create distance, but he refused to let go. When she didn't answer his calls or texts, he showed up at her door unannounced. When she tried to spend time with friends, he demanded to know why she hadn't told him beforehand. What Maya once saw as a complicated romance had transformed into a dangerous entanglement. The whispers in the neighborhood grew louder. Some residents assumed it was just a passing fling, while others feared something darker was brewing. Maya herself began to realize the gravity of her situation. The man she once allowed into her life had become unpredictable, his emotions swinging from possessive affection to threatening anger. She was living in the middle of a storm that no one else could see, and the walls of her new home, once symbols of safety and independence, were quickly turning into a prison built by the very man she had trusted. The night everything changed began like any other in Cedar Falls. The neighborhood was quiet, porch lights glowing softly along the streets, families tucked away in their homes. Inside Maya Turner's house, however, the atmosphere was heavy and tense. She had been pulling away from Richard Cole for weeks, desperate to reclaim her independence, but his grip on her life only tightened. That evening, when he showed up uninvited once again, she knew the confrontation she had been avoiding was unavoidable. Cole arrived under the familiar cover of duty, His patrol car parked just far enough down the street to avoid suspicion. When Maya opened the door, she could see the agitation in his face. His jaw was tight, his eyes restless. He didn't wait for an invitation to step inside. He simply walked past her, his presence filling the small living room like a storm cloud. For Maya, the fear that had been slowly growing in her chest over the past weeks finally solidified into dread. She understood then that this was no longer a romance she could end quietly. This was a battle for her freedom. The argument ignited almost instantly. Cole accused her of betraying him, of trying to humiliate him, of putting his career at risk. His words tumbled out in bursts of paranoia and rage, his hands clenching at his sides as if he were trying to contain himself. Maya stood her ground, telling him she wanted space, that the relationship was over. But Cole wasn't listening. To him, her attempt to break free was not a choice. It was a threat. The idea of losing her, combined with the risk of their secret being exposed, sent him spiraling into panic. Neighbors later reported hearing loud noises, thuds against the walls, the sound of furniture scraping across the floor, voices raised to a level no one could ignore. Yet in communities like theirs, hesitation was common. People convinced themselves it was just a heated conversation, something that would resolve itself. By the time doubt gave way to concern, the situation inside had already turned violent. The confrontation escalated quickly. Cole's rage boiled over, transforming from verbal attacks into physical violence. Maya fought back with everything she could, but the imbalance of power was undeniable. Years of training and a body hardened by police work gave him the upper hand. The living room became a scene of chaos, objects knocked over, picture frames shattered, evidence of a struggle in every corner. Cole's desperation only grew stronger as he realized the fight was slipping out of control, that there was no way to turn back from the choices he was making. When silence finally returned to the house, it was not the calm of resolution, but the chilling stillness of tragedy. Maya's lifeless body lay among the wreckage of her once safe home. The officer who was sworn to protect had become the predator, crossing the line from obsession to irreversible destruction. By the time the first neighbors dared to step outside and approach, it was already too late. The damage was done, and the carefully maintained mask of Richard Cole's suburban life had shattered completely. The secret he had fought so hard to keep hidden had erupted into the open, and the peaceful street that once symbolized security was now the scene of a nightmare. The news of Maya Turner's death spread through Cedar Falls like wildfire, shaking the once quiet neighborhood to its core. The sight of police tape strung across her front yard was almost impossible for residents to comprehend. Only days earlier, she had been seen smiling on her porch, waving to neighbors as she watered her plants. Now, her home had become a crime scene, and the officer many had trusted for years was suddenly at the center of a horrifying investigation. Detectives assigned to the case moved quickly. It didn't take long for evidence to point toward Richard Cole. His fingerprints were everywhere in Maya's home. His car had been spotted near her property that night, and text records revealed an overwhelming number of calls and messages to her phone in the weeks leading up to her death. What shocked investigators most was not only the brutality of the crime, but the realization that one of their own, a man who had worn the same uniform, had crossed the line in such a devastating way. The trial that followed drew national attention. Headlines framed it as a story of betrayal, obsession, and hypocrisy. Prosecutors presented Cole's secret life in detail, exposing his affair with Maya, his controlling behavior, and the violent end that followed when she tried to break free. Witnesses testified about the late-night visits, the constant surveillance, and the explosive temper that had begun to surface in recent months. Neighbors who once admired him now spoke with regret, admitting they had ignored the signs, because it was easier to believe in the myth of a trusted protector. But it wasn't only the crime that stunned the public, it was the layers of contradiction revealed during the trial. Cole had built his identity on prejudice, often expressing disdain toward the very community he secretly longed to be part of. The jury listened to testimony from fellow officers who recalled his racist remarks, painting a portrait of a man consumed by hate, yet driven by an obsession he could never reconcile. His relationship with Maya wasn't one of love. It was possession disguised as passion, control disguised as care. When the verdict was delivered, the courtroom fell silent. Richard Cole was found guilty of murder and sentenced to life in prison without parole. For the families in Cedar Falls, the ruling brought a sense of justice, but it also left scars that would never fully heal. The tragedy had taken not only Maya's life, but also the illusion of safety they once believed in. The idea that the man sworn to protect them had been capable of such brutality forced the community to question everything they thought they knew about trust, authority, and the power behind a badge. Maya's story became a symbol, a reminder that evil can hide behind respectability, and that control disguised as love can be just as dangerous as open hatred. In the years that followed, her name was spoken in conversations about reform, accountability, and the dangers of unchecked authority. She was no longer just the young woman who moved into a quiet neighborhood. She became the face of a tragedy that exposed the darkest truth of all. Sometimes, the greatest danger comes from the very person sworn to keep you safe.